Hello there, my name is Lewis Wieland, and for the last 30 years, I've hard to believe that number, I have published the official relocation guides on Atlanta that are distributed by the First Multiple Listing Service. And we have several publications, one of which has the North Fulton Chamber of Commerce name on it. It's called the North Fulton Community Profiles Magazine, and the North Fulton Chamber of Commerce has their name on it. We also have one that we print in cooperation with the Gwinnett Chamber, and one with the Cobb Association of Realtors, and then we have a metro area-wide publication as well. They are available at all of the real estate brokerage firms and at those chambers of commerce, and we also put them in the stores of the First Multiple Listing Service. And the 2022 issues will be coming out this month, and watch for them. They'll be in the real estate brokerage offices. And I'm also a commercial realtor with KW Commercial. My focus is multifamily, investment property, warehouses, industrial. And if I can help you with any of your real estate needs, my email is lou@louwieland.com. So also check out the website for information about the area, and this interview will be on my website as well. So as you know, every week we interview community leaders, and I had the pleasure of hearing and watching a phenomenal presentation last week that was sponsored by the North Fulton Chamber of Commerce. And I thought so much of it that I asked the speaker to come and show us the presentation on the program. It's extremely enlightening, and especially so many things are changing in our metro area and state. So I invited Ian Wyatt, senior economist at the Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce, to come on the show. Welcome to the show, Ian. It's a pleasure to have you.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Looking forward to chatting a little about the economy here.
I majored in economics and at Maryland, and we certainly chose different paths with the same degree. I mean, he went on, obviously. I mean, it's not much, you can't really do much with an undergraduate in economics, and so I just got my bachelor's in sold advertising. Ian went on to pursue a much higher level of involvement with economics, and I think you're going to understand as soon as you see this presentation how that turned out. It turned out extremely well. But he worked at Bank of America, I think, for 11 years in commercial lending. So he's quite an interesting background especially for commercial real estate, and in my background. And he was in competitive intelligence, competitive intelligence, developing business strategy and economic analysis. Before that, he was a senior economist at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, near and dear to me, at the University of Maryland, nearby there. So, and he has a graduate degree from Johns Hopkins, an undergraduate from Mary Washington in Fredericksburg. I bet you haven't heard of that school lately. Nobody has mentioned that one. How many students did they have, Ian?
3,500, no football team, no D1. We did have a heck of a rugby team, so I actually played, and we played Division I rugby and got to play all the big boys in that, and played at the national level.
Played Maryland. We had a great rugby team at Maryland.
Yeah, we played at College Park many times. Beat them a couple times too.
Wow, Maryland was 10 times that size too, 30,000. That's great. A tough group of people over there. So Ian, anyway, if you would, I know you have some really cool slides, and I thought what we would do format-wise is just ask you to go ahead and deliver that information, and then when we finish, I'll just ask you a couple of questions about several things in that presentation that intrigued me when I first heard it. So let me just turn the floor over to you, Ian, and go ahead and show people the information that you showed at the chamber.
All right. Well, yeah. So for those of you who don't know me, yes, as introduced, Ian Wyatt with the Metro Atlanta Chamber. Our responsibility is basically all 29 counties in the metro region. We look to grow the economy there and help improve the business climate, as well as help improve outcomes for everyone in the area. And looking out for trying to make things a better quality of life for everyone in our region. So we'll jump into the slides here and just talk about it. But yeah, and feel free to check us out on our website, and I'll share that with you in a little bit. But let's go ahead and check out the deck, and we'll walk through and help you understand what I'm seeing in the U.S. economy right now. So fundamentally, where are we in the Metro Atlanta region? We're coming off a really strong year. Atlanta is in a very good position. We are outperforming the national economy, and I'll show you some of the data evidencing this point going forward. But I also think really the economy's been running pretty hot and at an unsustainable pace. It's great. We've recovered from a pretty deep recession very quickly. But now we're kind of getting into traditional growth. That means basically like, hey, we've rebounded from where we were. Where are we going to be? And so I think a reasonable estimate for GDP growth next year is in the 3 to 4% range. That seems to be what consensus is holding to right now. We've definitely seen Omicron slow the fundamentals a little bit in the economy, a little bit of a pullback in some of that back to office activity. But the reality is, job market is really tight right now across the country. The job market in Atlanta is doing very well, outperforming the country in many respects. In fact, layoffs hit an all-time low. They just got announced this today. Lowest month ever in U.S. history for layoffs. 0.8% of people were laid off. By that survey has never recorded a rate that low. So even though Omicron was slowing things, we see employers are holding on to people because they see this as a temporary blip in the road to a really strong growth path we're on right now. Right now, we're seeing solid income growth, although that's being really weakened by inflation, a high savings rate and low unemployment. I think that's really going to drive growth going forward. Our fundamental challenges, though, is we are slowing to a more normal growth path. So that means getting back to normalcy also means less help from the government, whether that's the federal government in terms of stimulus or the monetary policy, basically the Federal Reserve, as you think of them, raising rates. I think we're also seeing some challenges from a tight labor market. The economy's doing really well. We're seeing some of those supply chain issues as well, similarly related to the labor market. And affordability in terms of housing, I think is really becoming an issue nationwide. A bit less so in Atlanta, but we aren't divorced from those national trends of challenges in terms of housing affordability. Well, let's get into the details of what I'm going to talk about here a bit. First of all, I'm going to explain a slide here because this takes a little bit of explanation, admittedly. This axis is 2-year growth. So the further down you are, basically, where is the number of jobs in a region versus before COVID? You can see, and the size of the bubbles tells you how many jobs are in each of those markets. And then, so if you're lower down, like New York, you can see is far below what their number of jobs they had before COVID. Los Angeles, pretty far down. You can see Phoenix and Dallas have actually pulled above pre-COVID levels. Atlanta's nearly a break even versus COVID levels. I think realistically, it may actually be above that, but there's this technical stuff about a couple surveys. Are we talking to people or are we talking to employers? If we're asking households about employment, they'll say employment is above where it was pre-crisis. If you look at employers, we're not there yet. Now, I think there's some reasons and technical differences in the survey. I actually lean more towards that household survey as being correct. And you can see also, though, this is how have we done over the past year. Further right you are, so Los Angeles, you can see, is recovering a good bit quicker than New York, but they're both far below where they were. You can see relative to this national bubble here, you can see Atlanta is both stronger in terms of year-on-year growth rate and since the beginning of the pandemic. Where has the job growth happened? Part of what's happened during this pandemic is we've had a real reallocation of labor. We've had people shift from different industries. A big part of this, of course, is the rise of online shopping. And that really was accelerated. That trend was accelerated significantly by COVID. So you can see some of the strongest growth and also that really strong growth we've heard about a lot about durable goods. It's hard to find a refrigerator. They're expensive, all these things. What does that require? Transportation and warehousing. So you can see that's really strong growth in terms of employment. And those kind of companies are really desperate for employees. They can't grow fast enough. You can see construction, and this is a really good sign for us, is that we are seeing home starts picking up in Atlanta. We definitely need that. We need faster home growth. See, that's where the growth is. Where have we not had growth, or where are we way down before pandemic levels? I would say number one, obviously hotels. Atlanta's hotel market isn't really the national hotel market because we are more skewed towards the business traveler, the convention traveler, and they haven't come back the same way the person going to, say, a Disney World is, or going to the beach. So we can see hotel occupancy remains well below normal levels in Atlanta. I think we're trailing the country. We are seeing some evidence with recent conventions that some of that stuff's coming back. We are seeing that. I think this coming year, we're really going to see that come back. However, I think employment in hotels may not recover as fast as occupancy, because I think some of those cuts they made, some of those labor saving things like, am I going to have my room cleaned every day in the hotel? I don't think that's coming back. I think they see that people will put up with this, and they're really not, they're going to keep those cost savings. Manufacturing, you can see those sales are down. I mean, not sales, that employment is down. Now, I actually don't think demand for manufactured goods is down. In fact, I think it's up. What I think is happening is those same workers are going over to transportation and warehousing for higher salaries. And manufacturing is having a hard time competing in terms of that space. And what's happening then is some of those supply chain issues we talk about. If you're down, obviously, in terms of employment, it's hard to produce as many goods. It's hard to meet those big orders that are coming in. And so this is adding to our supply chain challenges. But let's talk about where we are in terms of unemployment. Now, this graph's a lot to take in. The dark red line's Atlanta. You can see here, the orange line is the national unemployment rate. I put in a couple of our peer cities. I didn't do all these colors because it would get confusing. I think there are a couple things that should stand out to you. During the last recession, you can see Atlanta actually underperformed the national unemployment rate. Things were weaker here in terms of recovery. I think we really got hit hard by the housing bust coming out of that. And you can see it underperformed. But during this downturn, you can see Atlanta's unemployment rate never got as bad as the national level, and in fact has dropped much lower than even some of our peer cities, such as Dallas or Miami. You can see that our unemployment rate at this point, we've had the biggest gap versus the national rate we've ever had in a good direction. So Atlanta's unemployment rate is just 2.2% right now. People ask, who's dropping out of the labor force, who's not in it, who's still in it. We did see Georgia was a little different than the rest of the country. We've seen fewer retirees, fewer of that 65 plus crowd. Now, some of them have definitely retired. We've seen a few more people retire than were, but a lot of them were going to retire anyway. They may have just done it a little sooner because the reality is the baby boomers, what was the largest generation in American history, are hitting prime retirement years. They talk about older workers are working longer, and we've definitely seen that all around here. But at the same time, once you hit 65, a lot of people start retiring. Once you hit like 70, really labor force participation, as we call it, as in the economics game, basically saying, are you looking for work or do you have a job? Then you're in the labor force. What percent of people are in the labor force? That gets pretty darn low once you get down to age 70 or so. But we did see young men drop out and middle-aged women in particular in Georgia who dropped out, likely middle-aged women. This is really an effect of the child care issues we're seeing. They're kind of a prime candidates for people who have felt the strain of the fact that nationwide, I believe we're down about 110,000 child care workers than before the pandemic. So it is hard finding child care, and of course, the school disruptions. Georgia's obviously experienced somewhat less of that than the country. Middle-aged women are facing some of those strains and dropped out, but they're coming back. We are seeing them come back, as well as young men. A good number of younger men actually in Georgia dropped out during this period. But we're seeing them come back. And one of the interesting things is young people, say the teenagers, so under the age of 20, they're participating more than they did before the pandemic. And they've really been on the rise. We have seen a real rise in people working. And I think part of this is that Amazon effect to a certain extent. Effectively, you have a new $15 an hour minimum wage or close to it. So if Burger King or McDonald's is paying $13 an hour, that's a very different response you might get from some of those teenagers than when they were paying $7 an hour. And we're seeing them participate in a higher rate in the labor force. So we're seeing a lot more of that. Sorry, this is a little, but Atlanta's struggling with the reality of, we have a pretty tight housing market right here and a very low unemployment rate. And those two things are putting together to drive up inflation, honestly, in the region. I don't think this is sustained. I think there's some data quirks and issues in the data. And I think we are really going to build our way out of this problem. We are building a lot of housing right now. I saw one study that said for single family starts, we are fourth in the nation in terms of single family home starts. Things are getting better. So hopefully this inflation slows. I don't think it turns negative. It doesn't mean like housing values fall by any means. It just means the pace of growth slows. I think the other thing we're going to see in terms of housing is obviously people are concerned about the Fed raising rates. But I think it's important when you talk about the Fed raising rates to remember that the Fed's moving short-term rates. But a mortgage, of course, is long-term. That's a 30-year mortgage. Really, the 30-year mortgage rate is most closely tied to the 10-year US Treasury bond. And a lot of projections of that show fairly modest growth in terms of where that's going to be. What I do think one of the fundamental things we need to wrap our brains around, and I want to thank a friend of mine at Realtor.com for some of this content here, is the demographic structure of the United States. So this is how many people currently in the United States are in every single age year. So this is each year, and you can see, the millennials. This is a big peak versus Gen Z. You can see that's about 800,000 more people are about age 30 than are in their early 20s. So that's a big difference. And so what does this peak mean? What happens here? What do you do in your early 30s? You get married, you have kids, you move to the suburbs. To a certain degree, that stereotype is true. And that's like we call that a lifestyle theory, life cycle theory of consumption economics. Basically, in your 20s, you live in an apartment, maybe you hang out with friends. As you move up into your upper 20s, you're going to settle down, you have a little more assets. You're likely then to want to own a home, more likely to want a single family or say a townhome than an apartment. And so we are seeing this giant bulge, this millennial generation, move into those prime home buying years. And I think that's part of what we're seeing. And it's a very big shift. You can see it's nearly 1 million more than in, late Generation X in those years. So that's a really big difference in terms of population. I mean, that's 25% more, bigger age bracket here than 10 years before them. And you can see this is really reflects, these are the kids of the baby boomers. You can see this peak baby boomers years. So while the baby boomers are retiring, this is really going to drive home consumption. This is driving demand for housing. What's coming, though, one of the challenges in terms of workers, though, is you can see what's behind them. The people graduating college now, graduating high school now, is a smaller generation, a good bit smaller. So there's simply fewer workers there. There's fewer workers coming into the labor force. This is a challenge for higher education because you can see the generations continue to get smaller as well. So, getting people into college, well, if there's a smaller population of 18 to 22-year-olds, you're not going to have as many people in college. But it's also, I think, a real positive in terms of home demand for the next few years. You can see, though, in terms of construction, we still need to we are still well below in terms of permits, although this is improving quickly. Relative to where we were. So the dark red line here is how many homes are we permitting each year. You can see we are nowhere close to what we were doing in the 1990s or the early 2000s. We need to build a lot more housing in Atlanta. And really that's helping drive up prices right now at a rate where I think it is starting to affect affordability. And you can see where have these people gone if they're not building as many houses. And, we know Georgia is growing. We know a lot of people are moving here. In fact, our population grew the census said about 70,000 people, more people live in Georgia over the last year. But over 50,000 of those were migrants from other states. So we're still attracting a lot of people from other states doing a good job. You can see rental vacancies. This is statewide. This is, we're at a low level. I think actually in Atlanta, this number is a good bit lower than this. This is statewide data. So we're seeing, apartment rental vacancies are getting very low. These very tight supply conditions are impacting home prices. This is not, by the way, an Atlanta alone phenomena. In fact, the Atlanta Fed puts out a cool index. You can break it down by city. and they say that there is not a single metro area west of Texas, and all of the major metros in Texas also are not considered affordable to buy a house. According to the Atlanta Fed, they put in, it basically says, can the median income afford the median home? And in those markets, they can't. In Atlanta, you still can, although that metric, even for us, has gotten worse. So you think not a metro area west of the state of Texas qualifies, not Phoenix, not Las Vegas. All these places you think of as affordable are not so affordable anymore. And in fact, Atlanta is more affordable than many of these markets. At the same time, conditions are tight and prices are rising. So I think we need to make sure we continue to build. And I will I'm going to skip this slide for now, but I wanted to give you a totally different topic but I think this is an interesting one in terms of a lot of the growth we talk about in Atlanta. We're doing great in the technology space, particularly in North Fulton. North Fulton obviously is a core part of where one of those clusters of technology. We see Midtown, we see North Fulton, we see some of those markets really attracting a lot of technology companies. But we do think, we think part of the future in terms of Georgia's job growth going forward is electric mobility. You can see the governor has a council on that. They've really had a vision to grow this. So let's talk a little bit about the electric car, first of all. So if you look at a 1932 Ford, I like this. What's underneath the hood, underneath the body versus a 2020 Ford? And you got the transmission, the engine, all this stuff, the drive shaft, and you realize that's basically the 1920 and the 1932. 2020 and 1932 Fords are not that different. This is just a more refined version of this. If you look at Rivian, obviously, is the company that just announced they're going to be building pickup trucks in Georgia and put in the largest economic development project in state history with a new truck plant. What is happening in this car? So basically, the 2022 Rivian, there is a bigger difference between this car and the 2020 Ford than there was in 100 years of car development. So there's been more change in those 2 years happening than there has been in 100 before. And so what this means is we're going to need a new auto supply chain. A lot of parts that were involved in the engine and the transmission and the drive shaft and all those things are becoming obsolete. Well, let's talk about the auto supply chain. It's kind of an interesting concept, how it's built. The black dots on this map are major assembly plants. The orange dots are parts plants. And what you can see here is it's called Auto Alley. And you can see it's this north-south corridor following I-75 and I-65 from up here in Windsor and Detroit all the way down through Alabama. And there's a little more in South Carolina now. A couple more plants have been built since this map was done. And you can see we have the Kia plant right on the border, and Rivian's going to be here. And there is a huge potential that Georgia is right along this path. But honestly, we have fewer auto supply plants than I think realistically we could. We are in this, they like to have all these plants located along the same interstates. The parts trucks go back and forth. It makes a lot of sense. It's a very easy system. And so Georgia has great potential to play a much larger role in the electric vehicle future. In terms of its location, makes a lot of sense. And the reality is a lot of these orange dots you see on this map and some of these black dots, these assembly plants, are going to become obsolete and obsolete very quickly. So there will be a lot of need to transition. And you can see just the huge jobs potential we see from Rivian. And then we have the SK battery plant up Interstate 85, and that's really designed to build batteries for these electric cars. So I know that's a little bit of a digression of a broad macroeconomic topic, but I thought it was something interesting for everyone to see here. And Lou, you got any questions? I know that was a heck of a lot to digest there.
Well, thank you. That was extremely good information. And you mentioned in a more extensive presentation at the North Fulton Chamber the Savannah Port Authority and the transportation industry and its impact on Georgia and warehousing. I think a lot of people that I know are very interested in the warehouse industry. And there seems to be a expansion trail from the Savannah area, really on up into Chartwell and Chattanooga, and on up into Chattanooga and Dalton, Cartersville,
Yeah, following those rail lines. Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. I realized we didn't hit that one. I think there's kind of a interesting dynamic there. If you ask Americans and you say, what's the largest port in the United States? And most people wouldn't have known before all this supply chain mess, but that was something I did. I did supply chain messes long before this supply chain mess. I dealt with a lot of them when I was in commercial lending. Whether it was the Japan earthquake or Thai floods, there were all sorts of issues that disrupted US supply chains in very significant ways. Um, so it's kind of interesting. I'm going to stop sharing here since it's relevant. But one thing you can see in terms of US supply chains is most people would say Los Angeles Long Beach is the largest port in the US. It's right. Biggest port definitely by far in the United States. Second biggest port, most people could guess it's New York. No surprise there. Third biggest port, not a lot of people would tell you it's Savannah. In terms of container movements, shipping containers, yeah, third largest port in the United States, or port facility in the United States there. And so we've seen some supply chain challenges in the East. We are certainly seeing some of that congestion in the West Coast and expansions of Savannah. Savannah's definitely outpaced peer ports over the last couple decades and has outgrown them. So Savannah has become a fairly large port, and it has room. It grew about 20%. This is kind of a crazy stat. Imagine trying to build port facilities and rail lines and all this really heavy road connections, all this really heavy stuff that takes a lot of investment, a lot of time to build. And all of a sudden they say, hey, next year we need you to be 20% bigger than you were this year. That's a really hard thing to do. But Savannah had plans in place before this, before COVID hit, to expand. And they successfully completed some expansions as well as just pushed themselves really hard and grew 20% more shipping containers went through Savannah than any peak period before. And they are building more capacity coming in June. They're planning to expand by another 20%. So this is really getting massive. At the same time, we're seeing a lot of capacity expansions in terms of the related warehouse. And this is very tied to the growth of Atlanta and the Southeast. Atlanta is actually a weirdly central market. Most people think of Atlanta as East Coast. Georgia's on the East Coast, yes. But if you actually look north-south on a map and you say, where is Atlanta? Atlanta is actually west of Columbus and Detroit. It's not too different north-south. I mean, if you draw a line straight north from from Atlanta, pardon me. Yeah, we are west of Detroit. No one would guess that because the East Coast doesn't really travel north-south. It's kind of at a diagonal. And so why does that matter? That's like a weird geography quiz thing. And someone said, who cares? What that means is that's part of why we're the biggest airport in the United States and second biggest on the planet, because we're really close to a lot of the Midwest. We're really close to a very large portion of the US population. Within a 2-hour flight or a 2-day drive, those are basically the same things in terms of, so if you're a company and you want to put a warehouse somewhere, you can get to pretty much anywhere east of Denver in the United States within about a 2-day drive. So that's a huge portion of the US population you're talking about here is pretty much anything but the West Coast is within a pretty reasonable distance of Atlanta. And so Atlanta's become a big hub, and it's always been a big hub from the beginning. I mean, it was literally founded based on railroads, and it's been a huge railroad hub. We have 3 major interstates run through Atlanta. So in terms of interstate infrastructure, it's there. And as I pointed out on that map, that weird map point, we are actually pretty far west. So access to places like Illinois and Ohio and Indiana is actually pretty close, surprisingly close. And so between the second largest airport on the planet, great rail infrastructure, great road infrastructure, and the third largest port in the United States. And a lot of what they've done, how they've dealt with COVID and that 20% growth is they've just been running trains loaded with containers up to Atlanta and some of the other areas mentioned here, and put temporary facilities. So the truck drivers aren't having to drive all the way from Atlanta down, or some of these other areas around in northern Georgia, down all the way to Savannah. They're just driving to a local train yard where the containers can be loaded onto their trucks, and they can make those truck drivers more productive. So that's driving huge warehouse growth. We have record low vacancy in industrial right now. And that's a big part of it, is all of that distribution, all of that growth, that 20% growth in Savannah. All those goods have to go somewhere. They have to be parked in some warehouse. They have to be, packaged for distribution and pushed around the country. And we are, the strength of Savannah and the strength of Atlanta are very closely connected. That is in many ways one economic ecosystem we're talking about there. And so, yes, it's been huge for growth. And I think, going forward, hopefully it will be as well.
Ian, we could talk for days. I mean, this is extremely interesting, and I know you have a time schedule, but what's interesting to me in commercial real estate is the effect on all this Savannah Port Authority expansion and importing and this kind of consumption. What's the effect on real estate values from Savannah on up here, and then if you go to Atlanta, and then you go out, out 20, you can go up 75, you can go up 85. And my second question, and I know you're pressed for time, is what is the future of warehousing size and scope? What kind of warehouses are going to be needed for this new kind of business?
I think, I'd say both warehouse and industrial we talk about here when we're talking about the electric car revolution, I think, coming, and we are really seeing that being adopted as well very quickly. I think we are in this growth phase called the upswing in what's called the S curve in technology adoption. And so that's creating, if you drive out 85, pretty close to South Carolina, you get to this SK battery factory that looks like it could be the size of the Pentagon. It's unbelievable, that plant. And that's just enough for one electric car factory. So we're seeing, in terms of manufacturing, we are seeing, we are becoming, the entire Interstate 85 corridor is becoming more and more important to industrial, as well as the warehousing aspect. And that's kind of similar real estate, similar space, similar types of workers you're fighting for. But yes, I think we are seeing some very large warehouses coming in. I am not an expert on that topic. I don't want to play one. I have some great friends at CBRE. I'd be happy to help come on this show who are real experts on commercial real estate, and I rely on them for a lot of advice. But generally, yes, we are seeing Atlanta's location, the growth in Interstate 85 corridor in terms of manufacturing, as well as autos along 75 going north, well into Tennessee as well. So we are seeing all of that playing around us, and that is driving pretty strong growth in the industrial space and really tight vacancy rates. I think we've seen some, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but I think, typical healthy vacancy rate is normal vacancy rates north of 10. And we are down in low single digits right now. And a lot of what's left is kind of, small facilities, outdated facilities. There are not a lot of quality spaces left. It's very hard to find space. And yeah, as long as, the US economy continues to grow, goods demands remain strong, which, by the way, I think is very directly tied to those millennials getting into homes. People might not think about this, but every time you buy a house, every time you sell a house, you buy a whole lot of durable goods. You often buy new appliances. You buy carpeting or flooring of some sort. You buy furniture to fit your new space, or you sell furniture. And especially if you're moving from, say, an apartment into a much larger house, then you're really going to buy a lot of stuff to fill that house. And so that tends to really drive consumption of some of those goods that really need a lot of warehouse space or really heavy in terms of transportation. And some of those goods are actually kind of tough to make work, like furniture right now. If you're shipping it from Asia, it's tough to make the math work because shipping costs are so high on those goods relative to the size. Because like shipping a piece of furniture, a lot of your cost is in the transportation. But we are seeing, a lot of demand across the state. We're seeing record low vacancy rates. And so valuations, we've seen really strong valuations there. I think the question is, what happens on cap rates and what happens in terms of valuations as the Fed raises rates. If we really see the long end of the mortgage of the curve on interest rates move up more, I think we'll see a little bit of pressure on valuation there. But right now, the fundamentals are so strong in terms of demand that I think industrial, the question is more, I think the question will be in other categories, what happens. But yeah, industrial's doing great right now.
Yeah, it's been great having you on the show. I've taken more time than you agreed to offer, but Nick, I'd love to have you back on the show periodically for a lot of topics. One of which you just mentioned when you talk about cap rates. And you worked at Bank of America. You are a good guy for a discussion of that topic. And I'd like to talk to you a little bit about that I-16 corridor. I've been going up and down that corridor for 40 years. And there's a lot of land over there, and it has been there for at least, the 40 years that I've been going up and down that road. Hasn't changed much at all. But there is plenty of land and plenty of opportunity for growth, and particularly manufacturing, if the infrastructure can be developed. But anyway, that's a topic for future discussion. And I would love to have you back on the show, and let's talk about some of these phenomenal topics. Because, as you really well pointed out, this state is poised for phenomenal growth and change for all the reasons you mentioned. So, Ian Wyatt, Principal Economist, Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce. What a great program and collection of information. Thank you very much.
Well, really appreciate you having me on. Would love to come back and really enjoyed the conversation in the future. And yes, feel free to check us out, Metro Atlanta Chamber. We have lots of data on all these topics. And if you're looking in terms of whether it's industrial or office, we have a lot of folks here in our economic development office and my team as well. So part of what my team does, we don't just do macroeconomic research. We help on data, helping you compare cities, helping you figure out, generally, obviously, we think Atlanta is a great place to locate and we think highly of it. But we'll help you compare. We'll help you see why in raw numbers. We'll also help you figure out, where do I find the right workforce for my type of facility, for the type of thing I'm looking for. We provide a lot of data and we partner with, all sorts of whether it's the North Fulton Chamber, different commercial real estate firms. We're working with that. So if you have any sort of projects, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to help you with data and everything else and help you understand why we think Atlanta is a great place to do business.
Well, a lot of commercial agents are watching this. And I will be promoting this show heavily to commercial real estate agents. So anyway, Ian, we could talk till tomorrow about all this, but thank you very much again. We look forward to having you back periodically on particular topics and things that are coming up in the news, to have you come on and help us understand their implications and so forth. Ian Wyatt, Principal Economist, Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Donna Davis at Pro Video Talent, for producing this show, and have a nice day.
Thank you.